Good morning, Mrs. Hayes. Thank you for taking the time to tell us a little bit about your experiences over the last 50 years, mostly related to the Ray Charles experience that you had. So would you give everybody an idea of, what led up to your meeting with Ray Charles initially?
Well, I had run for the Miss Cupertino contest and won it. I entered primarily for the scholarship opportunities there, and when I won it, I developed a relationship with Marty Rowe, who was a local photographer who liked to promote lovely ladies. And as part of my duties, I was to be a mistress of ceremonies to a number of events, and there was a big one coming up, and Marty asked me to come and introduce Ray Charles on stage at the San Jose Civic Light Opera, which is what it was called in those days.
Did you know who Ray Charles was at the time?
Actually, I knew he was an entertainer, but I didn't have much of a musical friendship kind of background, and so I didn't know the degree to which he was a performer. So this was a surprise to me, and it was pretty exciting, and I was a pretty responsible young woman, and I wanted to do a good job. So Marty asked me to come and do this, and I did, and I met Ray Charles backstage, and he was there with his entourage, and he shook my hand, and he kind of paused for a minute, and then he said, well, let's get on with it. So I went out and I introduced Ray Charles, and then I went backstage and could watch him from backstage, and he sang Georgia in such a way that the crowd screamed, and they were so excited about it. And I had never seen anything like that in person, and I had goosebumps. It was really pretty special. So after the show, Ray came over again, and he took my hand again, and he said, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about your hands. And I didn't know what he was talking about. He said, would you go out to coffee with us afterwards? And I said, sure. So there was a lot of excitement, and Marty Rowe came over and said they asked if they could take you out to coffee, and I got to get home. So I said it was all right if they dropped you off at your house afterwards, and we agreed to do that. So there was a lot of confusion backstage, and people were asking for his autographs of his people. And I got several of those on the program, and that's when Marty had taken pictures of me and then took pictures of us after we put our coats on. I recall it was cold. I think it was rainy, and so we were all pretty bundled up before we headed out. And then we went to a coffee place. I don't remember where it was. Not all of his entourage was there. And sitting at the table was Ray and another man. I don't know what his name was. But after we talked for almost an hour, Ray was very curious about why I had calluses on my hands. And as I said earlier, I'd been working my way through school, so I was a stock girl, and I had done a fair amount of landscape work around to make money. And he laughed, and he said, you're too pretty to have calluses on your hands. And I said, well, how do you know you're blind? And the guy next to him laughed too, and of course Ray had that ever-dangling cigarette. And he was telling me about how hard work really never hurt anybody, and how he had worked hard. And he talked a little bit about his wife and his family. He talked about his mother. And then he wanted to know about the performance and what I thought of the performance. And I told him it gave me goosebumps, and the crowd just loved him and how he was fantastic. And then he wanted to know what I was going to do in the future. And I said, well, I really want to be a fashion designer, and I need to get money for my education. And he said, well, basically, you keep working hard, honey, and it'll be fine. And just before we left, I had the program on the table, and he had his hands on the table. He said, did everybody sign your program? And I said, well, a lot of them did. And he said, well, I will. And he started to sign it on the front, and I said, no, that's where everybody else is. So I flipped it over on the back, and he signed it on the back, and I could see he was kind of struggling to get his whole last name onto it, so you could kind of see that it goes off the edge of the paper. And we shook hands, and he said, "You'll do fine." And I have. And so that was the end of that encounter. And in the ensuing years, I had kept it with my diary and my scrapbook of memorabilia, because I met a lot of other famous people after that. I went on to win other contests, and Marty introduced me to more famous people, and I got other autographs, and it went. Well, anyway, I kept all of these things in a box in the basement, and we had a flood. And most of those things were gone, but I rescued the program and the photographs of Ray Charles and put them in storage. And in the ensuing years, my husband and I have been very involved in nonprofit organizations. For 40 years, I've had the luxury of not having to work for a living, but I have worked, and I have enjoyed it. And I sat on almost every board in Sawtooth Valley and Boise City. Went on to be a Public Works Commissioner, and then over a decade ago, I had the opportunity to meet Father Rick Frechette and his work in Haiti with his orphanage, and his desire to build a pediatric hospital for the abandoned children of Haiti. So I went to Haiti about 11 years ago and was so moved by Father Rick's work that I wrote a book and published it. It's called Touching Haiti. In the meantime, I've used every opportunity I can to raise money for the good work that he does. So when my husband and I downsized our home in Boise and lived full-time up here in the Sawtooth Valley, we put everything in storage. And as I'm kind of an eBay junkie, I thought, well, I have this Ray Charles autograph. Let's go see what it's worth. So I went online, and none of those autographs look like the one I have. And they were all handwritten. And Ray Charles didn't do that because he was blind. Anyway, I researched it and then got a hold of Steve Serkin at the Autograph magazine and mentioned it to him, and he became very interested, which is really why I'm making this video now. It's just to verify that I have the two photographs of Ray Charles and his autograph. And I put two and two together and thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could leverage this valuable autograph to raise money for Father Rick? And so that's what I did, is I'm offering it, and I'm very excited that the possibility of having Father Rick's life work, which is nearly 20 years in Haiti working for the children. And I guess at this point I really need to explain Father Rick. When I first heard of Father Rick, I thought he was just sort of a roly-poly priest who knew how to play the guitar and sing to the kids, but he is not that. Father Rick is, he's the past winner of the Opus Award, and that recognizes people for doing extraordinary things. And what Father Rick did is he came to Haiti to build an orphanage for children, because so many of the orphans were dying from diseases that we've eradicated in the Western world. And it really bothered him. So he came back to the United States and became a physician. And when I met him, he was a practicing physician in Haiti, but had a dream of really taking the hospice that he had built to separate the sick children from the healthy ones into a hospital. And that's where St. Alphonsus Project Haiti came in. They agreed to help Father Rick turn the hospice into a hospital. And right around that time is when I came to Haiti and was so moved by his work that I wrote a book that the hospital published, and we used that money to help Father Rick with his work. So now there is a 250-bed St. Damien Hospital that survived the earthquake 5 years ago, and they need the money for a number of items, not the least of which is blood testing for these children. And they have the technology through iStats and Piccolos to have these little cartridges, but they're very expensive. And so I really thought that if we could leverage the sale of the Ray Charles autograph, that we could at least cover 2 or 3 months' worth of the cost of these cartridges. So I asked that it at least raise $5,000, which would cover the testing of 400 children at St. Newman's Hospital in Provenance.
So it's really almost a Cinderella story of you coming from a situation where you have a need for scholarship. Ray Charles enters the picture, changes the game then, and also changes the game today.
Well, I think so too, and I really think that if Ray knew that his autograph was going to help little black babies in Haiti, that he'd really be thrilled with that.
Yeah.
And I don't need the money. My family isn't interested in it. And I think this is a good thing. So I'm excited to have this be a part of it. And excited to be able to tell people what a thrill it was to a young girl like me to meet somebody like Ray Charles. It was cool.
Yeah. Well, terrific. Thank you so much for your time, Donna Marie, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you very much.